Hey, I'm so excited to answer this question that I have for you. This may end up needing to be a full podcast episode. We'll see. I'll kind of dump what I've got here for you so far, and then you can comment below and ask me a bunch more questions, and maybe I'll do a whole podcast episode about it. So, here, let me read you the questions that I'm going to answer today. One is, how do you cue non yoga movement sequences? And related, how do you sneak strength and corrective exercises into a vinyasa class? Two great questions I've gotten several times recently, so that's why I decided to make a video for you. Okay. And then the third thing, the sort of bigger conversation that I'm excited to have is, how do you change the way you teach without losing all your students? So let's start with the easy stuff first, cueing non-yoga sequences and sneaking strength and corrective exercises into a vinyasa class. So, here's the thing. If you're able to teach a brand new beginner to yoga how to get in shapes, whatever shape you want, how to do movements without expecting them to know the names of poses, in theory, it really shouldn't be different for a non-yoga movement sequence, right? It's still the human body. It's still new and novel movement. So my first advice, actually, if you're really struggling with cueing non-yoga sequences without demonstrating, and of course, if you need to demonstrate a little bit here, it's not a huge deal. You guys may know I'm a pretty big proponent of teaching as much as possible without demonstrating. And every now and then you have to, and it's not the end of the world. But the first thing to do, I would say, is learn how to teach a brand new beginner, someone who doesn't know the names or the shapes of yoga poses, how to move in and out of the shapes that you want them to move in and out of without showing them. It'll be, if you're more familiar with yoga shapes, then it'll probably be easier for you to teach those without demonstrating and without being able to rely on the name of the pose. So what you need to do, if you've never taught like this before, is get someone who's not done yoga, who doesn't know what the hands and knees setup looks like, who doesn't know downward dog, who doesn't know low lunge with the hands on blocks, someone for whom that language means nothing. You need to ask them if you can teach them a free private lesson. Maybe it's your partner, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's your mom. And then my assignment for you is to sit on your hands and talk them into the shapes using only your words. It's very hard to do if you're not used to it. It's not going to be a great session. That's why it's a friend. That's why it's free. But it'll be really good practice for you in using your words to get people to do what you want them to with their bodies. Then if you're cueing something that's technically not yoga, if it's a strength building movement sequence or a corrective exercise, it shouldn't be any different. What you might need to do for yourself and for your students is slow down and offer yourself a bit more patience. So if you're used to being able to call out the name of poses and not have to talk people through the actions or the movements they need to make to get there, then this will be hard. But that's a skill you want to cultivate anyway, whether it's for yoga shapes or non-yoga shapes. So I've been doing a lot of sort of corrective exercises lying on the side. I'll show you an example in a minute. Both with the arms and with the legs, doing some kind of like work in the external rotators. But people don't need to see me do that. It's a very simple movement. I just need to be articulate and clear with my words and getting them down on the floor. So say you're going to come to lie down on your side. You're going to be on your right side with your head towards the windows and your feet towards the front of the room. I'm thinking about the yoga studio I teach in. And we'll have two folded blankets, thick folded blankets under your head. And then bend your knees and flex your hips so that your knees are up towards your belly, kind of like the shape of sitting in a chair so that you feel pretty stable. And then make sure that the back of your head and your shoulder blades and your sacrum are all in one line. Because what happens is when people lie on their side, especially if there's something under their head and their knees are bent, they curl into themselves, which is fine, but not if we're going to do strengthening for the external rotators. I don't want their head flexed forward like that. So I just tell people head, shoulders, sacrum all in one line. Everybody moves their head and their shoulders back, and they're able to get into the side lying shape I want them to be in without knowing where they're going and without seeing me do it. And then I would say both arms straight out, palms touching. Your bottom arm, your right arm will stay flat on the floor, and you'll keep your waist still and your ribs still and your chest still, and lift your left arm so that the fingertips point to the ceiling. Right? You just have to tell people what you need them to do with their bodies. You have to go slow, and you have to be clear, and you have to go in the right order. So you can't get ahead of yourself, right? You can't say all in one breath, lie on your right side with your arms straight and your knees bent up towards your chest. It's too much information if people are used to you saying the name of a pose and then doing it, right? So you have to go slow. Come to lie down on your right side with 2 folded blankets underneath your head. Pause. Watch everybody do it. Bend your knees and flex at your hips so your thighs are up towards your belly and a 90-degree angle between your thighs and your torso. Pause. Watch everybody do that. Move the back of your head and your shoulders back in space so you're not curled into yourself. Pause. Watch everybody do that. Make both of your arms straight at the elbow, reaching straight out from the shoulders, palms touching. Pause. Watch everybody do that. You just got to be patient, and it's not that hard. They'll get it. They're already used to listening to you and having you tell them what to do. So you just have to tell them what to do in a slow, clear, articulate way. And I would argue it's going to make your more traditional yoga teaching better as well if you're able to teach movements and teach actions and not just teach poses. Poses in general, I think, are only so interesting to teach, and they're going to be so different for everybody that if you're just teaching based on an external version of alignment, that's only going to be applicable to some of the students in there. But if you're teaching movements and muscle actions, that's something that's much more widely applicable. So this is a good skill to practice in general. Okay, so that's my advice about how to cue non-yoga sequences. So then a related question, how to sneak strength exercise and corrective exercise into a vinyasa class. One thing I would say is you don't have to sneak it in. You can just do it. What I've been doing, because I do a lot of that. I've been really into working with the external rotators of the arms and the muscles in the backs of the shoulders, keeping those really strong and healthy. And I've been building, and I've been using that to build towards forearm stand. But in my group classes the last few weeks, we've spent the first 40 plus minutes lying on our side doing strength work. So like I just described, and then just open and close 10 times with no weight. Then we have weights at the studio, which is nice. So people have 1 or 2 pound weights, and then 10 times with the weight. Then here, just turn this down. There's my podcast mic. And then same with the elbow bent. 10 times, no weight, 10 times with the weight. And so I take that as a way, and I talk about why I'm doing it and why it's important to work on strengthening those muscles. And then when I have them come up to their hands and knees, I ask them to really find that activation. Then we might do some stuff on our forearms. It just builds and threads really nicely. So I would always do a minimum of 10, if not 20 minutes of movement and warm up and prep before I do my first downward dog or my first warrior one. I would never just jump into those poses. So for me, putting the strength work and the corrective exercise in the beginning as a way to prepare the body for more challenging things we're going to do later works so seamlessly. And nobody seems to mind at all. People love it. I did a ton of corrective exercises in my class just last Friday. We did external rotator strengthening for the upper body and the lower body. We did all this glute med strengthening. Just everybody stayed on their side. And they were lying down on their side for the first 45 minutes of an hour and 15-minute class. And I felt oh God. But then they were so in their body and so warm and so clearly aware of the supportive muscles I wanted them to be aware of. We were able to jump into this kind of long, challenging standing sequence. Everybody really, I think, felt like they got a lot of work, and they felt like they got to move and flow the way they like to with me. And at one point, someone was oh, this sequence is going on forever. This is so hard. And I said, oh God, you guys laid on the floor for the first 45 minutes of class, cry me a river. And everybody laughed and it was fine. It was like they were like ready to lie down again. All that to say that nobody felt like we spent the first 45 minutes doing nothing, because it's really, really hard when you like focus in on that super challenging, deep corrective exercise work. It's hard. It doesn't feel like just lying around. It feels hard. And then it really helps them be in their bodies in a different way when we come up to do the more traditional asanas. So I think my answer is you don't have to sneak it in. You can just do it. And then also you can repeat it. You can take those same arm movements that I showed you, and maybe you're in an extended side angle and you do them again. It'll be different, because there'll be other stuff going on, but you can just revisit it and bring it back. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say about that. And the other thing that I do is I coordinate all of that movement with breath. So, and I have them very like attuned to their movement patterns and their breathing patterns. So it's inhale to open and exhale to close. And again, this is lying on the right side. Inhale, open, and exhale, close. And the first time I introduced that, I've really been on a kick with this. So the first time I introduced it a month or so ago, I was worried about people feeling like they were just lying around doing nothing. And I had a few new students in there who maybe were from a more, I hate to use the word traditional, but from like a faster, more workout-y flow studio. And so I just said, I gave a little teaching on the way that I like to translate the word vinyasa, which is to place in a special way. And also I think of vinyasa as movement coordinated with breath. There's no reason that has to mean 10,000 standing poses as fast as you can. Like no reason at all. Like this is just as much a vinyasa. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out as anything else. So I hope that gives you some ideas about ways to bring strength and corrective exercises into your vinyasa classes if you want to, but let me know what other questions you have, because I have a lot to say about this. Which all of that leads me to this bigger conversation I really want to have. Again, I think this is going to be a longer podcast episode someday. So let me just give you a short thinking about it here, and then we can dive deeper into it. But how do you change your teaching without losing all your clients or all your students? I'm so excited to talk about this because I have been seeing a lot of conversations about this in the online yoga spaces that I hang out in. It seems to me like part of what's happening is people are really waking up to the truth that is doing a very old school, strict asana practice without any other balancing movements is really unhealthy. I'm just going to say it. Doing only asana and lots of it, and certainly if you're doing really extreme shapes, is not good for anybody. And I've known that for a long time. I never just did asana. That wouldn't have been good for my body or really that interesting for me, even as much as I love asana, and I always have. And I think I always will. I don't ever see myself falling out of love with it. But I've always incorporated other movement modalities into my movement diet and into my yoga practice and into my teaching. That's just been part of my teaching since the beginning in 2005. But it seems like this is sort of like gaining traction. More and more people are doing it. So more and more people are feeling the need to change the way they teach. They see the old way that they used to teach isn't good for them, or they're not interested by it anymore. It's not good for their students. And so I really commend teachers on doing that work. I think that our teaching should be changing and evolving all the time. Mine certainly has. My teaching has changed. First of all, I was not a very good teacher when I started teaching. I was too young and too immature, but it got better relatively quickly because I taught a lot and I worked really hard to make it better. But even, I've been teaching now, I'm recording this in March of 2018, and my teaching has changed a ton over the last 2 or 3 years, and I hope it continues to change at that rapid rate. I think that some people have some concern that if they have experienced this, when they change the way they're teaching, I hear from a lot of people who want to bring in more strengthening movements, more corrective exercises, more of the kind of functional range conditioning work into their asana classes, and they're worried that people won't like it, or they have experienced people not liking it. So this is what I think. This is the first step. First of all, you have to teach what you think is important and wise to teach. You can't teach something that you think is bad for people. So if you're doing that, then I definitely recommend that you start to tone that down. But beyond that, I can't imagine there's that many people who are doing that. I think that for your students, having your movement style of teaching shift and change over the years is easier to deal with, and they may not even notice if the heart of your teaching stays the same. So even though the way I've taught movement has changed drastically over the last 13 years, there are pieces of my teaching that are just straight from my own heart that really haven't changed that much. And that is, I'm very clear about what I think is most important for me to teach. My highest intention as a teacher is to offer a container within which a student can experience presence, and I want to teach them the tools they need to recreate that for themselves. That's always been what's most important to me, and I have always done whatever I needed to movement-wise to make that possible within a container of moving towards balance and moving towards health in the physical body. That's my priority. That's the heart of my teaching, and that can come in lots of different kinds of physical packages depending on what my student needs. So as you're going through a process of wanting to change the way you teach movement, let me also encourage you to really dig deep into yourself and feel into what you find to be most important to teach. What is the heart of your work? And when there's a through line there, I think that students either don't notice or don't mind that what you're teaching them physically or the way you're teaching them the poses shifts. My students don't seem to notice at all when I teach things physically differently, except, maybe they like it better. But the more and more corrective exercise stuff that I started bringing into my vinyasa classes, I certainly didn't lose anybody. My classes only continued to grow and to grow. So I think as you're teaching, what's important for the moment, if you're wanting to change the way you teach, is to keep your teaching simple so that you can start to feel into what are your priorities? What do you think are the most important emotional, spiritual, inner work parts of the teaching to offer? And in what physical container do you want to offer that? But you get to decide what's most important to you, and you've got to keep your teaching simple enough that you have time and space and energy to explore. Is what I'm teaching right now really putting what I feel is the first priority as the first priority or not? And to let your teaching slow down so you have more opportunities to observe and see how your teaching is affecting your students. The other thing that I want to caution teachers against, if you're in a place where you don't like the way you're teaching, if you feel like a style of teaching or a style of alignment isn't resonating with you anymore, before you dump that whole system and become a devotee of a whole different system, even one that maybe think is healthier, functional range conditioning, corrective exercise, like before you dump one whole thing and completely give over your power and agency of critical thought to another system, let me remind you to keep really strong critical thinking skills. Because what can happen, I think, when teachers have been really firmly teaching one specific style of alignment, one specific style of movement, and then realize that that's not serving them anymore, it can be so disheartening. If you thought that that style of movement, that style of alignment was going to keep you safe. But no one style of movement and no one style of alignment, and certainly no universal principles of alignment, can keep you healthy and safe. So before you dump that entire system and completely give over all critical thinking skills and adopt an entirely different movement paradigm, let me just suggest that you keep coming back to your center and to what feels important and true and real to you, so that you can observe the way the movement cues that you're giving are affecting your students. So that what you end up with is a toolbox full of so many different options of ways to teach movement, of ways to teach poses, of ways to teach actions, so you can give the principle of alignment to this student that they need and the movement cue that they need to this student, and you can bring in exercises from functional range conditioning and corrective exercise, and teach that Warrior One and that old school Anusara style alignment that you think would be useful for the students that you happen to be looking at. So you don't have to dump an entire paradigm to take on a new one. You can just keep adding to your toolbox. That all becomes much more possible when you have a very clear sense of who you are as a teacher and what bigger things you want to offer in the context of movement. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that right now. But please let me know what questions you have. This turned into a super long video. And let's keep talking about how to change your teaching without losing all your students, because it is possible, I think, if there's a part of you and who you are that your students are resonating with that doesn't change. Like I said, my teaching has changed a ton since I started teaching, of course, and even in the last 3 years, and my classes have only grown. I don't think I've lost any students. So it is possible, to shift what and how you're teaching without alienating people if there is a real truth and heart and center of your work that doesn't change. And for that to come through clearly in your teaching, you have to know what that is. Okay, that's all for now. Let me know what questions you have, and let's continue this conversation.